So let's get started, and hopefully some other people are coming as well. I know we alone invited more people than this. We've got some folks from Lake Point also, and some folks from Centennial that are supposed to be coming. Maybe they couldn't figure out Centennial to here today or something. I'm not real sure exactly just yet. Or maybe they're stuck in traffic. My name's Scott Mannis. I'm CEO here. And we've got several new members of our A team, and then several other folks here who, you know, from time to time obviously are involved in transfers and everything else that we do. And so we were talking a couple of months ago, and I thought, you know, it'd be a good thing for us to just go back to, the basics on EMTALA training and some of that stuff. And of course, we have some experts within the company that deal with that. And then I got to think a little further. Well, gosh, if it's good for us, it'd probably be good for the folks at Centennial and Lake Point as well. No reason to do this thing 3 times or such. And so we've invited them, and glad you guys were able to come. We also had a request from some of our ER physicians to make this available on video later, or if they're working now or whatever the case is. So this is actually being YouTubed today. And so we'll have this available for as a link, basically, controlled link for access at a later time. I really don't want to do any more talking except to introduce Paige Kessman and Daphne Walker, who are with Tenet in compliance and other areas of legal stuff that we have, and I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more. I've been around Paige off and on for probably about 6 years, and I'm not sure that I've been in a session with Daphne before, but I know they'll do a great job in today's presentation. So ladies.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yep.
Well, we'll try to do this as informally as possible, so you can interrupt us at any time with questions. As said, we're in the regulatory group of the Tenant Law Department, so we help hospitals when they get surveyed. The hospitals call us. We can help them walk through if there are problems on site during the surveys. If they don't go well and a hospital gets a DCERT action, we'll help the hospitals with their plans of correction and implementation, education, if that's a part of the plan of correction. So we're here to help through all phases. Hopefully more on this end, which is helping you prevent EMTALA violations at the hospital, but if they happen, and sometimes they do, we're here to help them too. So Daphne Walker is recently joined Tenet from Fulbright and Jaworski here in Dallas in our group, and I'm very happy to have her. So she's going to do the first part of the presentation, and then I will do the second part. But like I said, feel free to interrupt with questions if we're on a particular subject matter that interests you, and we'll also stick around for questions at the end if we something sparks a question, a scenario you've had at your hospital, or just anything we can do to help. So that.
Good morning. As Paige said, I am regional counsel for Texas, so you might get me if you have any EMTALA issues first. And of course, Paige is always there to assist as well. We've sort of presumed a basic knowledge of EMTALA, but we don't want to talk at too high a level, so please do let us know if there's a particular point that you kind of want to reiterate. First of all, we'll just start with an overview of what EMTALA is. This slide kind of points out where the regs and the statute are contained. It really started as a means to prevent patient dumping, but as you know, it has evolved more into a technical regulatory framework. There's really only one mandatory reporting obligation on the part of hospitals, which we'll talk about later, and that's the portion that can really be tied to the patient dumping piece. In other words, if you've received a transfer in violation of the requirements of EMTALA, but it can be broader than that, and you'll run into situations where hospitals will report on other matters, or you may find yourself under survey where they may discover other potential EMTALA violations. Uh-oh, we just lost our video.
Well, that's interesting. You keep talking, I'll work on it.
She said keep talking, but obviously I stopped because I lost my train of thought. So EMTALA generally applies to hospitals that participate in the Medicare program. And again, it was established to give requirements regarding hospitals' obligations when patients come to the emergency department, a hospital's obligations to accept certain transfers, and then there's certain administrative requirements that go along with that. It's been expanded to apply to specialty hospitals. There was a time when specialty hospitals wouldn't take these patients in because they said they really didn't treat emergency room patients. They only saw a certain type of patients, but they now also have an obligation to stabilize within their capabilities and to accept transfers for services that they actually provide. There's several documentation requirements, which we'll get into more specifically. No luck.
No.
See if I accidentally touch something
Oh,
on that
maybe
screen.
over here. Okay.
And then the various administrative requirements, such as we're onto something. I didn't consent to this whole YouTube video thing. I mean, that's the only reason we're having technical difficulties, since we're being recorded. And we'll talk more specifically about the, it flashed on there.
We just won't be able to see it back here, but we'll be able to see it up there.
Okay, that's fine. I can follow it from back there.
Okay. Where are we at? Right here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I tell you what, you can stand here and I'll give you a little operator over
Okay.
here. Thanks for letting us wing it here with the technical difficulties.
So, generally, EMTALA requires hospitals to provide an appropriate medical screening examination, and we'll get into the specifics of what that entails. And that's to all individuals who come to the emergency department requesting an examination of treatment, regardless of their ability to pay. The requesting piece gets a little broader because you do have some obligations to sort of determine if a patient may have requested an exam when they have an issue on your property. If an emergency medical condition does exist, then the hospital has to provide either the necessary stabilizing treatment or an appropriate transfer. And again, everything in quotes is their terms of art, so we'll get into the specifics of what those terms mean. So the initial prong, of course, in determining when EMTALA is implicated is if someone comes to the emergency department. So what does it mean to come to the emergency department? It means that the individual presented either to your dedicated emergency room and requested a treatment for a medical condition, or they presented somewhere else on the hospital's property and requested treatment for what may be an emergency medical condition. It's defined broadly to include both the presentation to the hospital's emergency room or anywhere else on the hospital property. And certain ambulance situations will also implicate the statute.
We've had some situations here where we've had violations where the hospital never even knew the patient presented. We had at another hospital before I came to Tenet, an ambulance pulled up into the ambulance bay, brought a patient in, and then they were leaving the facility just as a vehicle pulled up with a patient with a gunshot wound. And it was a tertiary care hospital. It wasn't a trauma center. And so the ambulance said, "Oh, you need to be across the street at the trauma hospital." They loaded the patient in, took them across the street. The hospital never knew the patient was ever on their property. When the ambulance took the patient across the street to the trauma center, they had mentioned picking up the patient at what was then my hospital, and the surveyor showed up and wanted to give us a fast-track decertification for a patient that we never knew existed. So the standard is if they are on your property and they hurt themselves and need a standard of care, just like a slip and fall in the cafeteria, you fill out an incident report, you offer to get them to the emergency department because they could be in need of medical care. So if you know about them or you don't know about them, you can still be held to that same standard. So,
And go ahead, you have a question?
What's the radius for the hospital property? What's the radius to the hospital?
Well, it's not a radius. It's the hospital campus, it's buildings, any building that's operated under the hospital's provider number.
So remember that whole 250-yard rule? That applies in the definition of the main campus. So that's still out there in the CMS definition. So that still applies. But really they look at the area that you own. So, you know, if you've got a major thoroughfare here and you've got the park on the other side over there, I don't think they're going to apply it to that, even though that's 250 yards from your front door. It is in the technical definition, but they usually just look at what you own. Oh, one exception to that is you own a medical office building, right? So if there is a location on your property that is separately participating in Medicare, like within the four walls of a physician office, technically all they have to do is call 911. You would still want them, and they probably will take them to your hospital, but within the four walls of something that's separately a provider under Medicare, it doesn't technically apply to the hospital.
No, it's the main provider's provider.
Right. We have seen situations even here where an incident happens in the MOB and they take them somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Excuse me.
I understand. Yeah.
Inside that 250, aren't restaurants and other type of places also?
They are. They are. They are.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Since we have so many around, I want to make sure that.
Yeah. No. Anything that is like the purpose of the business isn't to provide health care.
Exactly.
And that was, also a piece of this.
You ready to go?
Yes. So, what is the dedicated emergency department? The department is licensed by the state as an emergency department. It's either held out to the public as an emergency department or the 1/3 rule. 1/3 rule is that based on a representative sample of patient visits during a previous calendar year, the department provides at least 1/3 of all outpatient visits for treatment of emergency medical conditions on an urgent basis without a scheduled appointment. For example, labor and delivery departments, and we'll talk more specifically about application to those departments as well. It could also include psychiatric clinics. And what are we talking about when we say held out to the public? And of course that just means generally, our dedicated emergency department, we consider that to be held out to the public as providing emergency services. It's held out as a place that provides care for emergency medical conditions on an urgent basis without scheduled appointment. That can be through advertising or having posted signs, which we are required to post signs. And then just getting back into hospital property, which Paige just got through talking about, means the main campus, the certified Medicaid provider Medicare provider, and it includes parking lots, sidewalks, and driveways, but excludes buildings that are not part of the hospital, such as restaurants and shops or physician offices that participate separately in the Medicare program.
See, I jumped ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. Just reinforcement. The next prong is, did the individual request examination and treatment? And this is a good point to get into some of the scenarios that Paige had brought up a minute ago. If the patient doesn't make an actual request for treatment, then it's the prudent layperson observer standard, which means you should know that they need some medical treatment. A request will be considered to exist if a prudent layperson observing would believe, based on the individual's appearance or behavior, that the individual needs examination or treatment. We had a situation at a hospital where we had an inpatient, and the patient's child was visiting and was running around the room, slipped, bumped his head, had a laceration. No one ever requested, emergency treatment for the child. But we did have staff, and of course this is where you really have to be concerned, because this is away from the emergency department, so you're not dealing with the staff that's used to seeing these types of issues and knows how EMTALA applies. So the staff on the floor went in to assist the parents with the child, but then because there was a pediatric hospital just mainly right across the street, escorted the father and the child across the street. Didn't stop at our AED. Didn't examine the child any further, but took them over there. So, of course, that was considered an inappropriate transfer by the EMTALA surveyor who got wind of this situation. Do you have any other scenarios under that?